Joining me right now is House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. He joins us now from Roanoke, Virginia, with an exclusive interview. Majority Leader, thanks very much for joining us this morning. Great to see you, Congressman.
Well, thanks for having me back, Maria.
Well, we want to kick it off. We're going to be talking with Lindsey Graham in just a moment about what took place last week. But I wonder if what took place around the Kavanaugh hearing impacted the midterm elections. You've been traveling the country a lot, raising a lot of money to keep the majority. What are you seeing? What's been the reception?
Well, the first reception, when you do have Lindsey Graham on, thank him. As I travel this country, so many people come up to me and say, tell Lindsey Graham thank you, because what he said in that hearing was really what millions of Americans were thanking. And what I'm finding is, prior to the Kavanaugh hearing, the intensity level was really on the Democratic side, that more Democrats were wanting to go vote than Republicans. Republicans thought there was not a need. But in the last week, there's been a fundamental shift, that people are now becoming upset, not just how Justice Kavanaugh was treated, but Dr. Ford, that the Democrats knowingly had this letter, held it, and then put her through this. You did not have to do this. And so it's a big frustration. And I was at an event yesterday, and one of the candidates said, I was having a hard time having volunteers come up. Now they're just coming to the headquarters. And I think the intensity level has now increased because of what transformed. But for all your viewers, if they just closed their eyes and thought about November 7th, if on November 7th we woke up and the Democrats took the majority, what you watched last week would be intensified for the next 2 years. We wouldn't be talking about how do we put infrastructure, how do we save Social Security, how do we improve our Veterans Administration. It would be hearing after hearing after investigation after investigation. America's economy would somewhat come to a stop, because that really was a view of what will happen if they took the majority. So
did things change materially post these last couple of weeks, where we saw the left really ramping up their attacks on the Republicans? I know that you've been traveling and you've been speaking with voters. And this weekend you were with President Trump, the president making an appearance at one of the fundraisers. We have a picture. What did the president say about this? And are you seeing that reaction and the numbers actually move? Because over the preceding weeks, a lot of people have been saying, oh, it's in the bag, the House is going to flip. Has that changed?
I think it's changed drastically. We look at just the absentee ballots, those who are requesting ballots prior. That has increased over the last week. We look at volunteerism coming into the campaign. We look at things that are happening online. And remember, Republicans are at a disadvantage because Democrats have two liberal billionaires that are trying to buy the House to flip it. You got Mike Bloomberg, who first promised $80 million. Now he's talking about going to $100 million just on Democrats in the House. And then Tom Steyer's, who's already spent $120 million. And he brags because he wants to impeach the president. He brags about his list being larger than the NRA, just focusing on impeaching the president. They're giving you a window into what they would do if they won the majority.
Right. And you've been, but nonetheless, you've still been very successful in terms of money raising these last several months.
We were successful. We raised $15 million that night for people across the country. But the difficulty is when you have liberal billionaires willing to write a $100 million check at the time, that's very difficult to try to equal the playing field. That's why, how do we equal the playing field? Results versus resistance. The results of this economy, better than we've seen in the last 50 years. More jobs being offered than people looking for it. You look what we just did last week. The largest pay raise our military has had in 9 years. Funding the military and building the military back from those cuts under the Obama administration. Or what we've done with the VA, giving the Choice Act, where veterans can go outside the network, even in their own community, to find health care. Or the most comprehensive opioid bill that has just passed the House and Senate onto the president's desk to combat that, because you've got 112 people who will die today because of an addiction. But that is all changing in the direction of the results that we were able to accomplish in the last year and a half. But the sad part is, not one Democrat voted for that tax bill that brought us this economy back. Not one Democrat in the House or the Senate. Not only did they not vote for it, they resisted it. They resisted letting people keep more of their own money. That's the challenge of what we're going forward come November.
And we know that Nancy Pelosi very famously said that it's just crumbs. Meanwhile, we just saw this past week another GDP of better than 4%. We're about to kick off the third quarter earnings season, and expectations are for 22% earnings growth, another strong quarter for the corporate sector, which you would expect them to create new jobs. I know that the president goes to some of these rallies, and it sort of energizes him to hear the people. Let's run a little of this when you were with the president this weekend at a fundraiser. Watch.
All the radical Democrats know is how do you obstruct and destroy, because that's what they want to find out. We are asking for your support this November so that we can protect your family, your country, and your freedom. Thank you very much.
Congressman, go through some of the specific races that you are looking at that are close or that you believe are striking in this midterm election.
Well, I'm in Virginia. One race that I look at that Barbara Comstock, Democrats think they could win that. If that election was today, Barbara would win. What she's been able to do to change that around. When you look at 41 open seats where Republicans have retired. But I look up in Minnesota, up in Duluth area. This is a Democrat-held area. We're ahead with Pete. I look across the country if you look to Florida, one of the most challenge seats, if you just look on paper, would be down in Miami area, Carlos Curbelo. He has the highest numbers he's ever had because he's been able to focus, one, on the district itself. But as we go across the country, there's battles in Texas because you've got a little tighter than normal Senate race. Or you go to California where we only have 14 House Republican members out of 53, but Hillary carried half those districts, and we have 2 open seats. But Maria, think of this. Ed Royce is retiring. So we have an open race right there. We have young Kim, individual from the district, worked hard, immigrant, came to America. You know what the Democrat opponent? Their Democrat opponent, Gil, he's been accused of sexual harassment, not by a Republican, but by a Democrat who was running for the state assembly. And I've never heard Pelosi or Feinstein stand up for her or compete about what was going on there. Or if you go across California, you go down into Mimi Walters and other seats, it is competitive. But what's happening is Mike Bloomberg are writing these $1 million checks outside of California trying to influence what California voters think or believe.
Yeah. By the way, there's also accusations against Mr. Ellison, who used to run the Democratic Party, and you don't really hear about that. Look, speaking of results, Congressman, you also have moved the needle on this social media conversation, whereas there are many people who feel that they're not getting a fair shot on social media. Their voices, their conservative voices, are not being heard. I know this was very important to you, and you made sure that Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, testified, and this past week you had a meeting with the CEO of Google. What can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, I'll tell you, as a conservative, I get very concerned about the bias that comes across in social media. Because we have watched that Google, in that own video, where they sat there right after the election, some actually crying tears, are talking about in their own memos of a silent donation of helping by using the internet. And how could Google actually use that? Because 90% of all searches on the internet go through Google. And 95% of those people drop off when it comes to the second page. So they have a great amount of influence of what goes forward. But I sat down with the CEO, Sundar. He came into my office. We sat with a number of members walking through not just the bias, but talking about privacy issues, talking about their work within China, making sure that they work with the American military as well. It was a very good meeting, and Sundar, at the end of this meeting, he pledged to come back to a hearing because Google had not been there before, and it made me great concern. But when I look at what's happened when it comes to Twitter, or what happens when it comes to Amazon or on Facebook, these are a great bout of influence. 2/3 of all adults get their news from the internet. And when you have individuals, and after we've had these hearings, we have found conservatives who work in these businesses, They have spoken up, and Facebook, a senior engineer, put together his own group because he was filled that it was a mob mentality, that he couldn't speak his own beliefs. And then you had Jack Dorsey himself, the CEO, said conservatives were not safe inside Twitter because of their beliefs. That's the bias we have to stop. We have to have transparency as we move forward, and that is the goal I'm working towards and why I continue to bring the social media and others from Silicon Valley into Washington to have the hearings.
Will you be able to make a change here? Do you believe that Google will make changes? I mean, let's face it, during the primaries in California, if you Google GOP California ideologies, one of those ideologies that came up on Google was Nazism. How does that happen? And somebody programs the algorithm. So are you expecting real change post this, or do you think we'll see legislation to make these companies smaller?
I expect change to happen. Look, as a conservative, to say my party was Nazism, not the party of Lincoln, not the party of Reagan. And what they do is they said that was about Wikipedia. So a couple things have happened already. I sat down and I met with Sundar a week or 2 weeks ago when we were out of session. After that meeting, and I did not request it, he went back and he wrote a letter to all of his employees about not putting their philosophical beliefs before the company, that they have to stop the bias throughout. We watched Jack Dorsey, who at first saying they weren't shadow banning, but before he came to the hearing, he said yes, he admitted they did shadow ban. So what we're doing is we're opening them up to see something. They're living in a bubble, that the philosophy that the individuals, and an algorithm is written by a person. Are they influencing the outcome? And if 90% of all searches go through Google, that's a real concern if you try to put your thumb on the scale. You could influence it. Or what comes up, or in the query, what you write in the query. Because it'll give you 4 different options. But if you write a negative, that'll be your first pick.
Yes, exactly. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.